from a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to maintain composure at your next job interview when your potential employer has a mouthful of skull. And now, the podcast host who would never be caught with a mouthful of skull because he prefers off-putting headwear, Pete Dominic!
I don't know what the two have to do with each other, but you are right about that. I would not be caught with a mouthful of skull, never since I saw a guy missing his lower jaw and assumed it was as a result of tobacco chewing. Yeah, well, that was why my dad quit chewing tobacco, at least. But skull, is that even really tobacco? Anyway, Pete Co, thank you as always for another irreverent opening. I am Pete Dominic, and this is my daily podcast, episodic stand-up, where each and every day we learn from experts and super smart people about how to look at what the hell is happening in the world, in our country, in our community, in our own lives. Tomorrow I've got the author of Boys and Men: Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. Kathy Nathan, longtime listener, told me to get this guy on. I researched him, and really interesting work that he's doing. I think you're going to really love my conversation with Richard Reeves tomorrow. But today, I've got a great conversation with the hilarious, brilliant comedian, legal mind, prolific creator of content. It's JL Cauvin back on today's show. You can never go wrong with JL in the conversation. We had another great one today. And a quick reminder, or if you didn't hear yesterday's podcast, this week's subscriber hangout will be Wednesday night at 8 Eastern, because Thursday morning I'll be headed up north to the Adirondacks, Lake George. It's Stang Bang, everybody. 18 Mustangs of Marcellus High School hooking up together. The class of 93. We stayed in touch. It's going to be a real good time. So I'll be hanging out with you on Wednesday night. I'll still be posting shows every day this week, but maybe a little bit lighter posting this week in terms of how many guests and how much of a production it's going to be, including today's show, because I really didn't find that many clips. I do want to talk to you about one big issue in the news that I want to mention. Yesterday, of course, was Memorial Day. The president, the vice president, and other important folks commemorated it at Arlington National Cemetery. Across the country, people paid tribute to those who died while serving their country. Memorial Day holiday, of course, observed on last Monday in May. And it is now also the unofficial start of the summer season. We are in it, ladies and gentlemen. It is, of course, unofficial. I don't know what that means, but I love pegging it at this date. This is always the deadline when I try to get the house all ready, decorated, flowers, garden planted, cleaned up from all of my messes, pool ready, and we are a go. Pretty close to it here at the estate. And we've got an above-ground pool, a 25-round, and may I suggest, whether you have an above-ground or any kind of pool, big or small, you try out the tether system for exercise, where they have this bungee cord, and you tie it to a belt around your waist. I mean, the thing can't be more than $20. I got it for my wife last year, and I only first used it yesterday. Pretty great exercise. You just connect a bungee cord, like an elastic line, rubber line, to your waist, and you swim in place, and I think I've discovered my new summer fitness activity. Should be fun. We'll see. Anyway, it's just a little cheap thing that I love using. Discovered it during the pandemic, but never actually used it myself. So there you go. A little gift idea from me for your summer pool usage exercise ideas. Okay. Well, also, yesterday on Twitter, I put out I guess it wasn't really controversial. I don't even know who saw it, but I thought on Memorial Day, you often hear that we honor veterans who died so we could live. Those veterans are mostly gone. We honor living vets of Vietnam through Afghanistan and Iraq best by paying for their care, because those wars were started by us and they were all wrong. I tweeted that out yesterday, and I think someone correctly said Memorial Day is for the fallen, Veterans Day for the living. No, yeah, that's right. But I'm just saying most of those who died in the wars that we had that we wouldn't be here without, and I'm mainly talking about World War I and World War II, they're gone. So these guys that died in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, their lives were lost for what? I mean, for each other is what many of them would tell you. I don't think that's really that controversial of a take amongst the veteran community of those conflicts, but correct me if I'm wrong. I'm certainly not trying to offend anybody, but when I hear that, it kind of irks me. Like Memorial Day to honor those we lost, who without their loss, we wouldn't have this America. And it's like, okay, if we're talking about World War II, but this country's not been invaded and been tried to be overrun by some foreign power. Our issue is domestic terrorism in 2023. So I just feel like these lives of these men and women have been exploited by this kind of patriotic pornography sometimes. And I think it makes us more likely to go to war and to support war thinking it's a just cause when it hasn't been in many of our lifetime is all I'm saying. So celebrate all of our men and women serving in our military, however you so see fit. But that's just my point. Because I don't want to see any more wars where members of the military are exploited and then they are not taken care of when they return. Anyway, I hope you had a good Memorial Day weekend, and I hope to see you at tomorrow night's hangout. What else did I want to tell you? A dramatic rescue effort will enter its recovery phase nearly 24 hours after part of a building collapse in Davenport, Iowa. I saw Kim Nyborg tweeting about this and others. A section of the red brick building on the city's main street came down Sunday around 5 p.m. As of Monday morning, total 8 people have been rescued from the wreckage. A number of people have been missing remains unclear. No deaths have been reported, but officials have yet to locate at least one resident in the complex that's still missing. The cause of the building collapse in Iowa has not been determined, but some residents described the sound as created as a huge explosion. Residents living in the area reported that the building was known to have problems, including visible water damage. So I don't think they're suspecting any kind of terrorist attack, but that's scary as hell in Iowa to have a building just collapse. And I read that story just to remind you, every moment's a gift. Try to stay in the moment. Try not to get too worried about the future that is not determined. That's totally uncertain. So wanted to mention that. Disney's live-action movie, The Little Mermaid, brought in $117 million at the U.S. box office in the 5th best opening for Memorial Day weekend in history, according to Box Office Mojo. So I guess the casting of the live-action Little Mermaid wasn't controversial after all, and maybe some people were. The mermaid, the actress who played the mermaid, is a black woman, beautiful human being, and I don't know who was actually offended by that, but didn't seem to hurt the box office there. They're winning at Target and Bud Light, but not with Disney, is the argument. And the big story that I wanted to mention and just elaborate a little bit on is representatives of 175 nations with divergent ambitions. They don't all have the same interests. Met at UN headquarters in Paris yesterday for the second of 5 sessions with the aim of signing a historic agreement covering the entire plastics life cycle. This is about plastic, everybody. And you know me and my rants against this for years. Humanity produces more than 430 million tons of plastic annually, 2/3 of which are short-lived products that soon become waste, filling the ocean and often working their way into the human food chain. The United Nations Environment Program said in this past April, those stats are from, plastic waste produced globally is set to almost triple by 2060, with about half ending up in a landfill and under a fifth recycled, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The United Nations Committee met in Paris Monday to work on what's intended to be a landmark treaty to bring an end to global plastic pollution. But there's little agreement yet on what the outcome should be. This is a big story. That's why I want to read a little bit more about it. Such an important issue affecting all of us. The Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee for Plastics is charged with developing the first internationally legally binding treaty on plastic pollution, including the marine environment. This is the second of 5 meetings due to take place complete the negotiations by the end of the year, end of 2024, I should say. The first meeting held 6 months ago in Uruguay. Some countries pressed for global mandates, some for national solutions, and others for both. But because it's extremely short timeline for treaty negotiations, experts say that in this second session that's taking place right now in Paris, critical that decisions are made about the objectives and scope of the text, such as what kind of plastics it will focus on, but that's easier said than done. Over 2,000 participants, including governments and observers from nearly 200 countries, have descended on the meeting hosted at the Paris UN Cultural Agency, UNESCO. French President Emmanuel Macron warns that the global plastic pollution is a, quote, time bomb, as delegates begin the 5-day talks in Paris aimed at reaching an international treaty to end plastic waste. The French president urged nations to put an end to today's, quote, globalized and unsustainable production model. I'll be following this very closely. I hope you will be too. Probably should be talking with somebody about it. But I wanted to mention that this is happening. And of course, the international chemical associations, fossil fuel associations, and companies are against anything that will limit plastic, and you will see them out there with all kinds of PR campaigns trying to confuse people into thinking that either it's not a problem or that we somehow need this single-use short-term plastic. But we can all do our best with the bags and the bottles, so stay conscious and mindful of all of the damage that we're doing in our lifespans and try to reduce your own plastic footprint. I don't know, makes you feel better, makes me feel better, at least. All right, well, that's all I've got for you here at the opening of today's show. I want to get to my conversation with JL Cauvin now. I always love talking to JL, and today was really special. I thought very interesting. I thought he was hilarious as always. I thought he was interesting as always. I thought he framed things really well, and it's just he's a great guest every time. And he's a longtime listener, subscriber, and guest on the show. He hosts 2 free weekly podcasts, Patreon with lots of monthly bonus comedy content, a cameo order for special epic personalized messages, 6 stand-up albums you can stream or buy. His first stand-up special is going to be out soon. He is a master impressionist. I think nobody does it better, and nobody writes better than him, along with the excellent impressions. Always great talking with him here on the podcast. He's also a pretty regular listener of this podcast, which always means a lot to me. So follow him on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and listen to our conversation right now. Oh, yeah, there he is. Been way too long since we had him on the pod, but I've been following closely the ongoings and goings-on in his life, career, and podcasts and specials. JL Cauvin, everybody knows him, everybody loves him. If you're not following him and supporting him, then what are you? What are they, JL, if they're not fans of yours?
Oh, no, then they are fans of mine if they're not supporting what I do.
Got it. I knew I set you up.
Please check out my newsletter, New Music for Olds, and my book, Supreme Myths.
I love it.
I'm really pumping out a lot of content these days.
He's also a great listener and subscriber to this show, so I'm very happy to have you joining me. Now, what's wrong? Did we get the pronunciation of... I've been saying DeSantis.
Everybody's been saying DeSantis except for one person, Ron DeSantis. In his release video, we're fighting the woke... He said, I'm Ron DeSantis. Like, he said it like Wile E. Coyote. You know, like where when Wile E. Coyote would present like E as his middle initial, even though we all knew him as Wiley, the adjective. He said, I'm Ron DeSantis. And I was like, DeSantis? Did he just call himself the wrong name? Like, everybody says Ron DeSantis. I've never heard anyone say Ron DeSantis until I heard Ron DeSantis say Ron DeSantis. I don't think his kids identify as DeSanti.
No, they probably don't identify with that last name at all, knowing how he's seen in his surroundings. Well, let me stay on him then. What did you think of Ron DeSantis's announcement on Twitter with Elon Gold? I mean... Elon Musk. I always say comedian Elon Gold because he's the only other Elon I know who's alive and not evil.
Yeah. I didn't watch it. I just made my own video like a day earlier. Yeah. Trying to parody what had not yet happened. I think that I have a theory, and it's a recent blog post of mine. If anybody wants to go to jlcomedy.com and just click on the blog, I think it's the last one I wrote as of this recording. But I said, the genius, if you will, the accidental genius of Donald Trump is that he has forced Ron DeSantis into going too far. Like, in other words, I compared it to Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears. When Britney Spears in 2001 released I'm a Slave for You, she sort of pushed to that tasteful limit of sexy young sex symbol. Snake, bare midriff, sweaty video, hot dancing. And Aguilera, her rival, said, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go even further. And she did the video for Dirty, which was her grinding an assless chaps in a boxing ring with many men. And I thought, see, you wanted to go more hard than Britney, but she went to the line and then forced you to either concede victory or go excessive. And it was kind of, I loved it, but I was like, a 22-year-old man.
Right.
It wasn't maybe for everybody. And I think DeSantis, if you look at what he's done in Florida, it's this kind of, well, Trump has gone this far and promised this much. I'll simply go farther. I will go further. I will go further. I will do abortion up to 6 weeks, which is basically a de facto ban. I will, ban everything resembling gay. Skittles are no longer allowed in the free state of Florida. It's like this excessive effort because he can't be Trump. So he's like, what if I'm more Trump than Trump? And it's like, first of all, people like his Trump supporters like Trump, and they're comfortable with wherever Trump sets the line of conduct and morals and law. But if you're not Trump, you don't get to you have to play within his rules. That's why the Republican Party is dealing with a problem of their own making. They helped create Trump, and now Trump is like, he's almost like AI. He's like Republican AI. He's become sentient, and he now spontaneously creates the agenda and the limits of the Republican Party. Like They think they're in control, but Trump AI, which shockingly, if you ask it to write an essay, the N-word is featured prominently. Trump AI is like, it's its own thing. Like whatever Trump does becomes the de facto line. So if you try to go more Trump than Trump, you've gone too far.
Right.
It's a real catch 22 for anybody trying to win that party, as long as Trump draws breath, heavy labored breath.
And as you said before, that AI not only is mimicking him and trying to go further at times on policy, from abortion to Disney to the woke whatever, but he physically has begun to mimic him as well. And I've noticed in your impressions of DeSantis, which are dead on, that you have started to use the hand gestures there. But I was like, oh, he's fading a little into Trump. I go, oh, no, he's not. That's a choice. It's smaller than Trump, but it's DeSantis doing the same movement. So you're actually just dead on with it. He's literally it's physically mimicking him.
It's sort of weird way. I almost feel bad, not like in a specific way. I feel bad for DeSantis, because DeSantis is kind of watching this going, well, I'm smarter than Trump. Yeah. I've made my way in the world better than Trump. I've accomplished more than Trump. And if you count from zero to whatever your accomplishments are. But he's just like, but I have to play the Trump game. It's like being a comedian nowadays and having to just end each set with a forced Q&A so you can make TikToks and reels of spontaneous, relatable crowd interactions. It's like a good comic should not want to do that, but you sort of have to play the game. And like I said, Trump is the rules have been set by Trump. He whatever he does is what you have to do. So if that means demeaning yourself, betraying your principles, doing hand gestures, even if they look like you kind of took Trump gesticulation 101 and got your associates in Trump gestures, you're not really doing a great job
with
at it.
Associates.
No. And you do the points, I'm just saying, he'd be better at it if he had gotten the 4-year degree at Trump University. That's all.
Might be an autodidact.
Implying.
We don't know. Yeah, it's pretty wild that he has tried to copy him, and yet it doesn't seem that he has a chance. So I want your political analysis. We've heard from everybody else. I only care about yours because you are inside the head of these two people. A, you're a very smart political analyst. B, you're nuanced. You're thoughtful. What do you got? DeSantis announcing that he's running for president. Why would he do that? Why now? And what are his chances?
I think he makes sense. You have to realize Ron DeSantis, for all his attempts to mimic Trump and be Trump, he's still somebody with a functioning brain, a high intellect, and he's sort of, broken it down into, well, I govern from the hard right. I've got military experience. I've got elite education, but I have some blue collar roots or whatever. I have roots in a battleground state of Pennsylvania. I'm a successful governor, at least from a right-wing standpoint, of Florida. So everything says I've got the resume to do this, and people have to be tired of Trump. And although a majority are, the problem is, if DeSantis had come out of the gates strong, I mean, really strong, just a slick announcement, just great campaign speeches, some of these other also-rans might have stayed away. But now you've already got the same 2016 issue coming up, because DeSantis, who everybody thought was, DeSantis, everybody thought was the guy who was going to take the crown. He's Kendall Roying this, if I can make a Succession.
You can to me, but you might lose a lot of people. So explain.
Not the people I care about, not the elites.
As long as you don't make a Little Mermaid reference, because I haven't seen it yet. I know you have. Oh yeah, no, I actually, surprisingly, I was surprised that I enjoyed it. I was surprised that you went. Go ahead to the Kendall Roy, Ron DeSantis.
I have it. Donald Trump is Logan Roy for the Republican Party, but he's not dead. And Kendall Roy is Ron DeSantis, where he's just like, I've got the credentials. I'm the guy. Yeah, we're gonna do this. Okay, yeah, right, yeah, we're good, we're cool. Yes, let's fucking do it. And I think Mike Pence thinks he's Tom Wamsgans. Right? I have been nothing but a foot soldier sycophant. The only time I may have strayed from the party line was when I was about to be lynched. It's the only time I sort of stepped out of my role, and then I got right back into my role. I think Mike Pence thinks, Mike Pence, have you seen the finale of Succession?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so Mike Pence, if he's allowed to watch Succession, because it has the word suck in it, and that might be demonic. But if he's watching that, he's probably got a big smile on his face going, that's the play. Good work, Tom. That's the game we've been playing the whole time. This is going to have to be a tweet from me later. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm going to release the clip.
And so, but now, because Ron DeSantis, for many reasons, couldn't, his own lack of charisma and Trump's death grip on enough of the party, he couldn't come out and be that, everybody get out of the way. It's DeSantis versus Trump. And we're all going to rally, normal people or relatively normal people will all rally behind DeSantis, and he'll take this thing 61-39, and he'll take on Joe Biden in 2024. But because he didn't do that, every joke, and they're all jokes. I'm sorry. Nikki Haley joke. You can't sit behind me with your family at opening night of White Boy Rick in Midtown Manhattan and be a serious presidential candidate. Tim Scott, you are just the self-hater of the year. Who was the guy in 2000? Alan, Black Republican, Alan Keyes.
Oh, Alan West.
No, that's later.
Oh, another Black Republican named Alan.
Alan Keyes.
Yes.
Alan Keyes. Wasn't it Alan Keyes?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so you get Alan Keyes, and then you move up to the Herman Cains of the world. There's Ben Carson. There's always, and I think Christian Finnegan mentioned this as well, but it's one of those things where you go, right, there'll be that 2-week period where all of a sudden Tim Scott, just like Herman Cain, just like Ben Carson, is actually leading in the polls right now. Right. That's the due diligence of the Republican Party going, I'd consider possibly in an apocalyptic scenario, maybe voting possibly for a man of 1 or 2 Black parents, possibly. Okay, we're just going to put you down as a yes then. And then they release that poll and people go, wow. Then Donald Trump calls them a psychopath and they plummet in the standings and they're never heard from again. They become a Newsmax correspondent or they die at a rally.
I mean, that's not going to happen this time, because when it did happen, it was a whole field of new candidates that we were just tasting each week. Well, Republican primary voters were. The rest of us were watching. This, I don't think we'll see anything but one front runner. However, you're a legal analyst of sorts, a lawyer, a Georgetown educated. Do you think the big question that I think is legitimate? So
is Boris Epstein, though. I feel like I now, as a disclaimer, have to include that.
It's such a. So I think that's the most important and fair question. Trump's legal issues, how do they affect his candidacy? That's the only thing that's different this time around. Otherwise, he's the front runner, and probably.
And if I may answer that,
yeah,
they will not. Like, the only way they will impact him is if he goes to jail and can't actually campaign or serve in office if reelected. God help us. But I made this point, not to plug my blog again, but I've been finally getting back to sort of writing regularly, which I hadn't been doing for a while.
Good.
That used to be when I had, that used to be my calling card when I was sort of a much newer comedian. But the gun, it reminds me of the gun issue, because with guns, we're now at a point where there is no slaughter. There is no age group young enough to be mass murdered. Because Republicans, what they will say, and I think in their hearts, there's this idea of kind of like a martyrdom. They're willing to martyr your kids to prove that, like, that's not really martyrdom, but they're willing to martyr your kids to prove the strength of their convictions, not their own kids, but like other people's kids must die to prove how committed I am to this God-given right of gun ownership. It's a very weird thing to think that the Constitution is a God-given, from atheist to believer, thinking that the Constitution is very much a man-made document. We have all the books and drawings to prove it.
Yeah, but no, I'm glad you say that. I always get irked when say, this is the greatest country God gave man, or this is a God-created Constitution. I suppose if you believe in God, it's true. God did everything, but I don't. You believe in God, so why don't you believe in that?
It's sort of taking it to such an absurd reductio ad absurdum, to use a legal term. It's kind of like, well, yes, I guess at some point you can claim God did everything. Then what are any of us doing anything ever for? God will just do everything for me. It's like, no, men inspired maybe by the divine, but also very secularly created a constitution with rules and real life experience baked into it, not a sort of Mozart symphony, who, after reading Christopher Hitchens' God Is Not Great, which was a very interesting, well-written book, I did find it funny that he cited Mozart as like one of those few things that made him question the existence of a deity and like the positive. And it was him being tongue in cheek about it. Of course, he didn't really mean it, but it was just sort of a way to praise the gifts of Mozart. But I would like, to me, the Second Amendment has become this thing where you're like, how are we going to shame these people? You cannot. And this is what's so scary about it, is that every dead kid, the Republican answer, if you ask them what's in their brain or heart, would be, I don't like dead babies. I don't like dead children. I think it's disgusting. And that's why I'm pro-death penalty for anybody who does it. But let's really think about this. Look at how strong I am, if you think about it, because I'm willing to not bend. I'm unwilling to bend on my principles, no matter how many dead kids you show me. And there's this kind of backwards but correct, like, yes, that does, in a gross way, prove your conviction. So every dead child is almost like this weird merit badge of, I'm even more committed to my principles. More dead kids, that means secretly I'm more committed and more, it's a weird thing. And Trump becoming, I make that analogy because Trump being indicted, it becomes he raped somebody? I don't believe it. Oh, he committed tax fraud? Don't believe it. Oh, he hid documents? Oh, he's a complete fraud and everything he does is criminal. Well, that just proves how desperate the left is to get him. So, Donald Trump could murder somebody on Fifth Avenue. Like, we have to kind of acknowledge that that's actually true. That's no longer, I think, a metaphor or whatever. I think if he killed somebody, first of all, there'd be a GoFundMe. If the victim were black, there'd be a GoFundMe immediately. It's like, well, he's a billionaire. So why are you raising because GoFundMes aren't about helping. It's about lack of virtue signaling. That's what Republicans do. Trademark it, put it on a t-shirt. They lack it. They absence of virtue signaling. That's what Republicans are about. Like, oh, he strangled a homeless black man. I'd like to donate $50. Why? Just to let everybody know that I'm a piece of shit. I want it to be known. So like Donald Trump, you believe he's a successful billionaire, but if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, you would donate to his GoFundMe. And also that would be something disgusting. Like, wait, our billionaire ex-president started a GoFundMe? Yeah. I thought that was for people who needed money. It's to absence of virtue signal.
It's really hard to understand how, after all of the horrific death of innocent children in their classrooms or sanctuaries, that somehow Republicans, both the lawmakers and their supporters of the, quote, Second Amendment, would be able to justify it. But boy, you did a deep dive of psychoanalysis there. And I think that there's got to be some truth to that for some people. Otherwise, how do we possibly wrap the rest of our heads around?
How do you rationalize? Like, I'm sorry, even if I mean, I still think, and it's a cliche at this point, but Sandy Hook was like a point of no return. Mm-hmm. Because the idea, I mean, I'm sorry, the idea, I saw one of those videos on Twitter from the most recent Dallas mall shooting, I think it was. Like somebody had posted video on Twitter, and I saw, like, briefly what appeared to be a child's head blown open by a gun. This was I think it was Allen, Texas. Do you remember that shooting?
How did you see that? Where?
Because I was just, you saw Allen, Texas or something trending. So I was like, oh, I'm like, okay, well, that's definitely a shooting. And somebody had posted video, and it was, I think, verified. Because I know my brother maybe I shouldn't say this, but he works at a major newspaper. And I think they had discussed in general terms that kind of stuff. Like how do we promote or not promote things like that? But I thought to myself, that was disgusting. And I kind of put a warning to anybody. I was just like, hey, and then some people were like, I think as gross it is, that Emmett Till moment, like maybe we should promote that. And I go, I don't think we should, because it won't change any more minds anymore. Like if you're like me, I don't need to see a child murdered to be like, let's do everything we can to prevent that.
Hey, me neither. Me neither. Right. I don't either need to see it either.
Right. It was not like, I wasn't hunting for it. I was like, wait, what is this? And some people had posted like a blurred video version of it, but I was like, I think that was just you don't even understand kind of what you're seeing. You're like, I think that was a kid.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was a murdered kid. So Sandy Hook, when we couldn't do something, and it just goes to show you, we had an assault weapons ban with bipartisan support in the 90s. Like, that's not 1880. Like, and now it's dead on arrival. But Sandy Hook was one of those things, like 20 and 6 adults also. I'm sure they weren't pleasant to look at when they were blown apart by military weapons. But a first grader is a fucking tiny being.
Yeah.
And I don't care if that makes, this isn't fucking Abraham. I called the album the blog, The Worst Abrahams, because this is like, God is not calling you to slaughter your child to prove your fealty or faith. If you're allowed to change up your principles when kids are blown apart by military weapons, you're allowed to go, I think my principles were a little off. I think I need to recalibrate, because you know what? Nothing, unless God comes down from heaven and literally says to you, protect the Second Amendment at all costs, follower, it's okay to change your mind and be like, oh, you know what? I think it's okay
it's not okay, because it used to be about the money in campaigns from the NRA. And now I don't believe it's nearly about as much about the money as it is about the identity. So the way that you're looking at that is from the value judgment of a, quote, moral person. But that now it's a part of their identity, their core identity. So it's like the concept of changing your mind based on what God thinks, believes, or said. I don't think that factors into the equation for those who refuse to be moved at all by the obvious horror that you've just so eloquently described, much less any more.
I didn't mean it literally. I just meant, like, in general, something it shouldn't take something otherworldly to get you to go, huh. I mean, I'm very like, even now, I'm not going to like break down, but it's like, if you really just sit and ponder for a few minutes, murdered first graders, like there's so little, like, it's like, you're just like, what the fuck? How did this not? And it's our country. And people, it's our country. Our people are the problem. Yeah. That's the thing. Nobody ever says this. And I've jokingly defended your friend Michael Cauvin, another plug for another guest. I'm a Substack subscriber of his. I like his writing and I like when he's on the show. I agreed with him on the platforming thing. Like, I was with 60 Minutes interviewing Marjorie Taylor Greene. I was fine with that. But I think what people never say is the truth behind, I don't think we should platform Marjorie Taylor Greene. And you can have a principled reason to think that was wrong. But the real truth behind that is, I think too many of our citizens are fucking dumb or cruel. And I think any normal person who you show Marjorie Taylor Greene to, in my worldview, is like, who's this nutbag? Who's this awful person?
Right.
You don't have to be Republican, Independent, Democrat. You listen to her, you go, she's either a bad person or kind of off. But what we really mean by don't platform her is, don't let the tens of millions of Americans who might be susceptible to that, don't let them see that. And that's the truth, is that what we're really saying is, and I said this on my podcast a few weeks ago, and I'm sure if I ever ran for office, it would be a clip that could be shared. I said, I don't really trust a lot of Americans anymore with our freedoms. I'm not saying to curtail them, but I don't trust a lot of Americans with the freedoms we have.
Right.
They can't responsibly use the internet. They can't responsibly protect children. They can irresponsibly pretend to protect children from drag shows, but not from guns. That's insane. So I don't trust a lot of Americans with our freedoms. I'm not calling to curtail those freedoms. I just operate in a world where I go, I think we are now too flawed as a people to effectively utilize and protect ourselves and our loved ones with the freedoms we have. Like, that's just the bottom line. Like, I think that's another reason why people are so scared of AI, because we're like, we're quickly devolving as a species, at least in America. And so AI will be another frontier of like, oh no, more things to exploit the fact that we're becoming worse as a species. Not better.
No, I think that's a really interesting points, and to discuss the nuance of trusting our freedoms with people who believe that celebrities are harvesting the blood of children while they're scared is definitely something that I don't feel really comfortable about. Just real quick, the nuance take on the platforming of Marjorie Taylor Greene on 60 Minutes. I was never against, and I'm not against, platforming certain people with certain ideas. What I'm against is the edit and the journalist and the way it's done. I had serious issues with the way 60 Minutes did that. And, I just don't need to see her working out. And if I do see her working out, be smart enough to show that Confederate flag cooler that she had in her workout room. Did you see that?
No.
She made a video from her dumb garage workout room, and in the garage there was like a cooler with a Confederate flag on it. And it's just like, okay, well,
or show this Christian woman having an affair at her gym with one of her gym members.
I don't know if you need to show it.
No, you blur it out, please.
All right,
just her head, basically just her head, and blur everything else out.
Let me ask you about the debt ceiling negotiations. And have you been closely paying attention to the back and forth of all of this?
Closely, no, marginally, and I haven't even read today's front page. I'm going to see my mom later today, so that's my reading for the train.
Well, what do you think?
So I know, have we reached a deal?
A tentative deal. Whether or not it passes through Congress, I haven't caught up. Talking to you here on Memorial Day during midday, but even so, the criticism from the left is that Joe Biden, caved, or should have handled this differently, or should have been more prepared, or should have got ahead of it, or Democrats should have gotten rid of the debt ceiling when they had the votes, which they never had the votes. So that's not.
Here's the thing that people don't point when they say things like, what if, and I'm just my broader point before we get specifically to the debt ceiling. I always post this joke to a friend of mine on Twitter where I'll say, the child tax credit extension that like reduced childhood poverty by 33% or something. That wasn't extended because Joe Manchin was using like 1980s lingo to describe poor families. Like they might use it for drugs. And I laughed because it was like 49 Democrats were willing to vote for it. He was the one holdout. And what you get a lot from sort of the cynical progressives that permeate social media is like, this is why you can't trust Democrats. They don't do anything. And I go, 98% of Democrats voted for this. We have to identify the problem, which is we need fewer Republicans in office. Like, that's the problem. Right. Like, when 98% of a political party votes to get more direct money to families to help with childcare and expenses, that's the dream. That's the Bernie Sanders AOC dream. When 0% of Republicans do it, like, how is it Democrats are the problem? Because the expectations, this is a bit on Tallboy, which we can plug shortly, my special coming out Friday. I said, Democrats are treated like the struggling single mom, and the American people are their resentful teen son. Whereas Republicans are the deadbeat dad that shows up every 4 years for an election and promises a bunch of bullshit and how cool things have been going for them. And the kid's like, yeah, dad rocks. That's why you suck, mom.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, it's a more fleshed out. But that's how, like, that's what it feels like. It's like we should not be an angsty teen when it comes to observing our politics and our society.
And by the way, there's two other issues which this is true of. We're talking about the debt ceiling, how Democrats, when you mentioned the child tax credit and how 98% of Democrats voted for it, and how, Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema stands in the way, two senators. The two other issues that this is true of, as long as I've been covering politics, which at this point is pretty long, 20 years almost, are guns and immigration. Overwhelmingly, Democrats have supported all kinds of gun regulations, certainly at the state level where they've gotten it done, where they're not gerrymandered, but certainly at the national level. Obama did. He put all kinds of political capital, as did then Vice President Joe Biden, after Sandy Hook. They couldn't get it done. You know what else they did that with during Obama, 2013? Immigration. And a whole bunch of Republicans in the Senate voted for it. But it was the House that wouldn't even take it up for a vote. So stop blaming Democrats who overwhelmingly supported comprehensive immigration reform, along with the senators in the Republican Party in the Senate, and obviously gun reform. Overwhelmingly they did.
Right. Like it's this idea of the both sides. And I know you're like, obviously we've discussed sort of the movement to encourage people to be independents or third party things. And I read there was an op-ed by Christine Todd Whitman like a month ago in a New Jersey paper.
Yeah.
And it was one of these, like, and to be fair, the article was more about the electoral process, not necessarily picking a third party candidate, but opening up more opportunities for third parties. But she started the article by listing three things. And I, like Rick Perry, I can't remember what the three things were, but but all three were Republican caused issues. Like all three were like January 6th. And the debt ceiling and like something else that are completely Republican driven. You couldn't even get one Democrat to call it a bipartisan problem. And yet it was like, so let me get this straight. The Republicans, rob, steal, and murder. And we have a bipartisan crime problem is like the argument a third party. And there's enough people in this country who just think it's like clever or intelligent or deep thinking to just kind of go to the quick, both parties suck, right? Both parties suck. And I go, not really, like not in any substantive way. Like we're not talking about the AOC wing versus the, whoever, I don't know, more Manchin's a little different, but there can be real policy discussions within the Democratic Party because the goal is always to accomplish things and to help people. The job is not to stifle and stop government itself.
Right.
So
right.
Debt ceiling. I think maybe it can't be true that like Joe Biden did cave, but it's also the right thing to do. Like once again, if I'm making the argument for principle having to sometimes give in to reality when you're in a job, like I'm not telling you how to live your personal life and abandon your principles. But like, much like religion, politics, it's okay to have your personal beliefs. But when they start negatively impacting lots of other people, maybe it's time to recalibrate that a little bit. And with Joe Biden, I mean, he's looking at it going, yeah, I don't think we should. I think these people are political terrorists, but I'd like to save the hostages also. like I'd like to not have metaphorical blood on my hands with the economy.
No, so the hostage terrorist metaphor is perfectly adequate for this situation, because you're going to take down the plane or I'm going to concede to your demands. I've got to, or else you're going to destroy the whole world economy. And they were prepared to do it, and Biden would have gotten the blame.
Right. And even if not political, I think Joe Biden, maybe he's just a skilled, empathetic politician, but I think Joe Biden doesn't want to see the economy tank irrespective of political considerations.
Right.
I don't think
right. Well,
I think he's just like, I also just don't want that. It would be bad for me, but it'd also just be bad. Right. I'll be fine. If I don't get elected, guess what? I got a nice looking wife. I got money. I'll retire and be happy and like, fine. I'm not going to be Trump complaining for the rest of my life about a loss, but I don't want this to happen. So, once again, it's Republicans are the problem. And, all you would need for that, all you'd need is a few Republicans to be like, and I to this day, I never understand politicians, both sides, but obviously in my lifetime, it's been more Republican driven, who are so, I'm 80 and you have to pry this office from my debt. I won't do the right thing. The right thing for me is dying in office. That is the principle that I cling to most, which is like, I want them to carry me out when I'm 100 from my chair in the Senate. Principles and other people and the people I represent be damned. And it's like the fact that it's just this lockstep, like we have to fight and it's fewer Republicans in office. It's the only
which is hard to do.
History, it's the only solution.
Which is very hard to do with the media the way it is, with gerrymandering, with the ability to demagogue every issue and misrepresent it, and so on. But I hear you, and I think that's obviously the best possible analysis, the best way to look at it. Overwhelmingly, we feel one way about guns, and yet we can't get it done because there are too many Republicans in office, and we can go on about other issues. What do you think about, and what are your thoughts on?
I got just one thing on guns. I don't like guns. When I was a prosecutor, I worked with a lot of cops. I was always like, not nervous, like I have to leave the room, but like when I'm sitting in my chair typing something and like a cop is standing next to me and his gun is like next to my shoulder, I'm like, well, that's the job. But I'm not a big fan of guns. But if I lived somewhere, because obviously on my train travels and my bus travels all around the country, you'll see like a nice house in the middle of nowhere. And I'll go, yeah, you know what? For hunting, for vermin.
Listen, you don't have to justify it. I feel the same way. My thing is pretty simple about guns.
And nobody's trying to, like, the realistic thing is, it's the same way you have to believe Democrats are demons to justify this ridiculous anger you feel. Because if you're rational, you'll see that Democrats are getting things done. If you're irrational, you can perceive of them as demonic, hateful entities trying to corrupt your children. But with guns, it's like, it's the same thing of like, if you accept the fact that Democrats just want to get some of these powerful weapons off the streets and out of people's hands and make it a little more difficult to get a gun, not difficult like you'll never get a gun, but like we just like a more thorough process before you get a gun. Who is in this the only way to be against those things is to have the false belief. Gun confiscation, eliminating the Second Amendment, things that you have to have these far-fetched, ridiculous ideas, because otherwise you'd have to go, well, I don't see how waiting 10 days for a gun instead of 2 or whatever.
Well, it's my like God-given right. It's in the Constitution would be the argument. But of course, my thing about guns is it should be very hard to get one. It should be harder than a permit to build my shed or the fence around my pool or buying Sudafed or any number of things that it's harder to do and get, that you have to fill out paperwork. It should be really hard. Different guns should have different they should be heavily regulated. That's my feeling on guns. So make any argument or hypothetical why you need one, fine. You don't get to have one tomorrow unless we see a sample of your creative writing and your journal entries. Finally, wanted to ask you about corruption at the Supreme Court and how closely you're following that, and if you have any
this
thoughts.
Is just going to show you of what a good stand-up with Pete, like listener and community member I am.
Oh, you're reading the Shadow Docket by Steve.
I just bought it. It's going to be a summer read, probably after they release a bunch of horrible decisions in June. I'll make this part of my July reading. But it's here's my thing with the Supreme Court.
He held up Steve Vladek's book, by the way, the Shadow Docket, how the Supreme Court uses stealth rulings to amass power and undermine the republic.
It's a long subtitle. My thing with the Supreme Court, the irony here is I understand why you wouldn't want a Supreme Court. And I know this will sound weird, but the idea of, for people, you want the Supreme Court to be this honor-bound institution of such high unimpeachability that you go, yes, they don't need the same code. This is our highest court. But then you're kind of doing like a deity thing with them. Like, oh, they are, we never question the wisdom or the integrity because they don't. They're people, and there have been some shitty people put on the court throughout its history. But not especially now. There have been really shitty people throughout. But this court, obviously Samuel Alito being like a miserable, friendless, snarky douche is not a crime. But he doesn't seem like a cool guy. Like, I would be curious about Professor Siegel's take on that. Like, because he'll compliment the Scalias and Thomases for their jovial social skills, but think they're horrible people at their core. Whereas Alito, I feel like the carpet matches the drapes in terms of shittiness. The core matches the exterior probably.
Yeah.
But the idea of these, like, not wanting a code of conduct, it's like, I said to somebody recently, I said, here's the thing. If Republicans have to make like a criminal defense argument for Clarence Thomas, you've already lost. Because the point is, your judges shouldn't even be, they should be above reproach. It's not a matter of like, oh, you know what? They couldn't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, so I'm still a good guy. It's like, no. The stench of corruption, the whiff of it should be nowhere near you. And I know I'm a modest, low-level attorney, the lowest level, some would say, and sometimes I don't even know I passed the bar, to be honest. No, excuse me. You passed the bar because they were probably grading it wrong that day, and you're actually one of the worst lawyers I've ever seen. But a sometimes struggling comedian. But when I hear that the justices make $290K a year, and many of them are married to successful spouses because they met in those kind of elite circles.
Or came from money, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh.
Right. It always makes me go, it's the same thing I said when I saw Snoop Dogg do a Hot Pockets commercial to his song, Drop It Like It's Hot. And I said, how much money is enough? And when I look at the Supreme Court, I go, you're making a great living. You much like a teacher or a family physician, getting into a certain practice within your field that you're not going to be the surgeon making $1 million doing boob jobs or whatever. Being a judge comes with power, prestige, honor, respect, and not as much money as being a partner at a big firm.
Right.
So this idea of like, but you're still making a good salary, like $290K plus usually your wealthy spouse, what do you need? Like, why do you have to do all these like corner cutting and like what I'm explaining to you is like, so you already look unworthy. You already look unworthy if you're like culling together all these, what do you, Clarence Thomas on Cameo next, right? like if you had Clarence Thomas on Cameo, you'd be like, he's not violating the law, but I feel like this is no longer worthy of the Supreme Court. Do you know what I mean? Like, and he's done a lot worse than that, but it's that kind of idea. Like, it comes with a certain expectation. And if you can't, and we have to face facts once again as a country, we can't trust these men and women to be honor bound anymore. And that's a sad thing because you'd like to think the Supreme Court would be men and women of unimpeachable credentials, and there are always some that are. But now we cannot trust that we can't just be like, you have been vetted for the Supreme Court. You have a lifetime of legal scholarship and expertise and work that proves that you are somebody worthy of the court. We just have to be like, people are people. Priests are men. They are not, they whatever you believe, they are men. And they come with the fallibilities and the problems of men. And when you put them into situations or make them the type of people who have never had a sexual experience or came from a abused background, you are playing with fire.
And then when you create an entire atmosphere of protecting them their whole careers, and to the point where you literally funnel people with those proclivities into your institution because that's where you're going to be safe and have access to children. I'm sorry, finish your point.
Yes. No, all correct. All correct.
And yet you still give them your money.
It's a dilemma I constantly wrestle with, and I'm sure to some people that sounds stupid, even wrestling with that. But once you've wrestled with a priest, you have no problem wrestling with your emotions. No, I never did. I was a very large child. I was a man child, and they don't go for those. Which is why when I'd go into confession, my priest would play Hall & Oates, I Can't Go For That, and I knew I was safe.
Well, I was a loudmouth, and they went for me. Fucking pushed me down the staircase.
Whoa.
Yeah, but my dad went and had a chat with him that day.
Oh, boy.
Chisel D threatened the priest, and then that was that. I mean, the point being, by the way, I don't know, I forget what we were talking about, but like the point being between you and I, we weren't targets. We weren't good targets. We weren't vulnerable to being convinced to trust them. Therefore, we weren't molested or violated, to be clear. But it's obvious why certain people are targeted and why they're very good at that. Sorry.
So what I'm basically saying is Justice Alito molests kids. I think we can bring it all together.
I don't think you would say.
I think that what you have is a Supreme Court where we have to just get over ourselves and say, you know what? These are men and women. They are fallible. In some cases, they are incredibly fallible, and we've been warned about their failings as people. Clarence Thomas is obviously kind of the most salient example of like, you've been bad for a long time, and we friggin' ignored it or looked past it, and we just have to have a code of conduct. This idea of like the romanticized vision that maybe John Roberts has of like, no, I want to restore the court like to this demigod level of like moral authority. It's gone, and it's not coming back.
Right.
You need a code of ethics that will keep people in line. Of course, you'd like people who come and don't need the code of ethics, but guess what? It's there just in case.
Right.
In case power. I think I just made this up, but power corrupts. And maybe you need safeguards because you're acknowledging that people are people. You don't even have to be necessarily a bad person,
right?
But you are a person. And the idea, and Clarence Thomas, his legacy as a very quiet judge can be bolstered by if it's his corruption that gets us to have 50 years from now a resurrected Supreme Court in terms of its integrity instead of the partisan joke that it is. Supreme Myths, everybody. Check out my book and podcast, Supreme Myths.
JL Cauvin on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Cameo, jlcauvin.com. Of course, go subscribe to all of those things for free. Get a paid subscription on Patreon. What else do you want to plug so I don't have to do it after?
Yeah, I have big things to plug right now. My second special, which because of Clarence Thomas level malfeasance on my first special. No, I don't know that, but it's just the first special, Half Blackface, has been a nightmare. Tallboy, my second special, is going to be my first special now, and it comes out on my Patreon channel this Friday. So this Friday, if you join my Patreon at either of the two levels, you'll have access starting Friday to Tallboy. And I'll be in Chicago as part of Karen Hunter's show, July 2nd in Chicago. That's on my website. So not a ton of gigs right now on my calendar, but the special is obviously a big deal. I hope that Half Blackface will be out, this summer as well. But check that out Friday on my Patreon. So join up now, I guess, if you're interested. There's a lot
Patreon.com/JL Cauvin, Cauvin. Go check it out, everybody.
A lot of bonus sketch videos, like a Mitch McConnell series, a Mike Pence series, bonus podcast. I do a monthly book review show, which is a lot of fun also. So there's a lot of stuff for a very small amount of money. But the special is obviously a big deal. It'll eventually be public, so don't worry if you're tight on money. But if you want to throw a few bucks and get the first access to it, Friday, June 2nd. The 20th anniversary of my first open mic in Washington, D.C., by the way.
Very exciting. That's very exciting. Congratulations on all of that. I'm obviously one of your biggest fans, and I appreciate you joining me today.
And you have a big thank you on the first special. Sadly, it's now my second special. So if I had known the order of things, all the nice thank yous would have been on
the only reason I ever do anything is for gratitude.
Yeah.
And also, in addition,
I know that about you.
Money.
Yeah.
Who I am. My core.
Yeah. The ethical carpet matches the ethical drapes.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, there he goes, everybody. JL Comedy. Check him out that's his website. Check out JL Cauvin online. Go follow him on the Twitter and the Cameo and the Instagram and, of course, the YouTube, and listen to those podcasts. He's so good. He really is a human content machine. Brilliant and hilarious. Always very honest, JL Cauvin. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of Stand Up. I hope you will not miss tomorrow's episode or any day's episode. Tell your friends about it. Give us a review on Spotify or Apple iTunes. And, of course, subscribe to the podcast with a paid subscription for as little as $5 or as much as you want. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Today's quote of the day. Just a cheesy summer-inspired quote that I found. Summer. Hair gets lighter, skin gets darker, water gets warmer, drinks get colder, music gets louder, nights get longer, life gets better. What do you think of that one? And how about this from old Ralph Waldo Emerson? When summer opens, I see how fast it matures, and fear will be short. But after the heats of July and August, I am reconciled, like one who has had his swing to the cool of autumn. Well, maybe that's more of an autumn quote, but enjoy the summer, everybody. I'll talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll, take us out.
They'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. See him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell